Hey, it's Al Angelo from A Plus Racing, bringing you a video on how to keep your Miata alive. And it doesn't even have to be a race car. It turns out a lot of people are watching this channel that aren't building a Spec Miata, but they have a Miata they like to, tune around on a windy road, and they're having problems with it, and they're chiming in. So what I do this is a Q&A Monday video that I'm making. I've got a list of people who have asked me questions, and I'm going to go ahead and address them one at a time. So if you want your video, or not your video, but your question brought up on a video, go ahead and ask the question in a comment section in any one of my videos, and it'll get me an email of your question. I'll write down your name, I'll write down the question, and this is where I try to address it. And I try to answer as best I can. I don't like to be the smartest guy in the room, but, well, it's after school, and I am the only person in this room. Well, you know what I mean. Anyhow, so let's get right to it. Hey, so I got a question from a guy whose name is Don't Do Time, and I think that's good advice. So, yeah, I wouldn't do time. I've done weekends before, and it's not fun. All right, how do you know if your car jumped timing? Well, usually it runs like crap, all right? So, or they don't even run at all. So anytime I've seen a car jump time, and I got to tell you, I can count on one hand how many times I've seen a broken timing belt and have almost all my fingers left over, and it always breaks the timing belt when something wasn't installed correctly. Miata timing belts, they just don't break. So, yeah, I've never seen one just bust because it got weak or broke or even strip out. But anyhow, so it runs bad. What do I do to check it out? Well, I made a video on that. I think it's tips and tricks of how to set your cam timing, something like that. And and I say, well, this is the basic that I do in order to make sure that the car is in time. So basically, I take the valve cover off, I take the top front cover off, and then I line up the crankshaft so that the notch on the harmonic balancer lines up with the T down at the bottom. That's top dead center. And then I come up and I look at the timing marks to make sure that they're in the right area. So by taking the top cover off and the valve cover off, you can get to all of that. So that's how I tell if the car is in time or not. And then if it's not in time, man, I just take all the stuff off the front. I take all the covers off, and so that I can get a really good look at everything and make sure that everything is good with the the idler pulley and the tensioner pulley. All right, so that's what I do. Thanks for the question. Don't do time. Yeah, don't do time. All right. Another one is just send 6020. Where can I get a fuel pressure regulator valve like the one I use for the NBs? So I get those from Advanced Autosports. Ben over in Wisconsin, he runs that, and he owns it now. But the god of all Miatas started that business a long time ago, and man, his name has slipped my mind, but he was the Miata god. He was the guy I called when I had questions about Wheeler, Dave Wheeler. He was the one that I called when I had questions about a Miata. He is the almighty, the all-knowing. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. He left the business down to Ben. Ben's doing a great job down there. I buy a lot of parts from them. I recommend you buy parts from them also. So that's where I get that adjustable fuel pressure regulator valve. I believe they make that kit right there, and it's a really good one. I highly recommend it. Thanks. Just send it, 6020. All right. Salt Lightning. All right, Salt Lightning. Do I do any other builds other than Spec Miatas? No. I'm sorry, I don't. I don't build drift cars. I don't build autocross cars per se. I just do Spec Miatas. And I mean I have street cars, and we live in a windy area, and so like we go out and cut up the roads on after work and stuff like that. But for the most part, I don't build anything other than racing Miatas that are primarily meant for road racing. So all the cars that I build, I primarily road racing cars. Have my cars been used as drift cars? Yeah, they do classes up here for the drift cars. We throw some skinny little stocker, really hard old tires on there, and then they go out and they practice their drifting or braking techniques or whatever they do. I rent them out for that. And so, but the car's not designed for that. That's not the intent of the car when I build it. So I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I kind of stick with what I know. So that's why this channel is becoming really successful, because this is what I really know. I know how to set up these cars. I know how to build them, and I know what goes wrong with them. So, and that's why I'm helping you with this. I hope that answered your questions. Salt Lightning, like that name. All right, the Dope Chicken. Hey, Dope Chicken, he like chimes in every couple of weeks, man, with some great questions and great comments, and he's been a long time subscriber. I really appreciate that you put in the effort to be a part of this channel. Matter of fact, you hit me up, man. If I can, I'll send you a t-shirt. Send me an email, your size, where I need to send the t-shirt, and I'll send you one. So Dope Chicken asks, hey, what about that crank wobble? You know, that's a really common thing. It used to be like, oh, only the short nose crank had crank wobble. But now we're seeing a lot of long nose cranks getting crank wobble, and also the keyway is getting hobbled out. So I had a long nose 1.6 car that had a pretty bad wobble on a harmonic balancer, and I took it apart, and yeah, the keyway was a little wobbled out. And that seems to be what's happening. So I bought that crank saver kit on eBay for like 50 bucks or whatever. It's an aluminum bushing that goes over the crankshaft and into the harmonic balancer. Done. Fixed it. Man, why didn't I come up with that? Why haven't I come up with one for a short nose crank? But, you know, why didn't I think of that? Because I'm sure somebody is extremely wealthy now, and it's not me, over that crank saver kit. So, you know, if I could afford it, I'd put one in every one of my long nose crank engines just to keep that from wobbling around. Because you bust that harmonic balancer off, it's an engine, you know, and it just keeps ruining the front of the crankshaft. So I think those crank savers are a good idea, and I've used it one time. So maybe I'll buy another one and I'll do a video. But right now I don't have any crankshafts wobbling. But I hope that answered your question, Dope Chicken. Hey, man, thanks for all your support over the year. Car Loss 976. I put, oh, he bought the same sway bar suspension kit that I got from Advanced Autosports. It's the one that we're using in Spec Miata. And there are some shims in there that go to the end links. And it goes between the Heim joint of the end link and the little bracket on the control arm. And so, yes, there are two different sizes. A couple of them are thicker. And you know what? To tell you the honest truth, because I wouldn't lie to you, is that I'm not sure where those thick ones go. Where have I used them? Where I needed them. So sometimes if you put the thin one in there, that Heim joint is at a really steep angle. I mean, it's like maxed out on both of its Heim joints. So when I see that, and then I use the thick one, I think it kind of depends on like where the bar lines up on the rear subframe is where how that end link angles are going to work out. And so sometimes when I see it's real excessive, I put the thick one in there. I've even put two in there, all right, to get it to where the Heim joint wasn't maxed out on its ball and socket, if that makes sense. So I would watch for that, you know, and I've done it where I've gotten away without using the two thick ones. You're going to have extra ones, and I just put them in the drawer because you never know when you're going to need them. Okay, so I do hang on to those. Good question, and that's Car Loss 976. All right, flipping the page over. Oh, this one. Al, when are you going to do the step-by-step transmission overhaul? Because I think that someday the transmissions are going to run out. And you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. They are drying up. You know, I was down at H&M Auto Dismantling in Rancho Cordova. That's kind of where I buy all my parts, by the way. So I know those guys. They're like brothers of mine, and they're pretty cool to me. They see me coming. I lay my credit card on the table, and I'm like, I'm going in. They're like, all right, we'll watch for you. And I go back there. I got my little bag of tools, and I just rob everything I want. And then I carry it all up there, and I'm like, all right, let's make a deal. And so, and I got to tell you, man, it's like an auctioneer, you know, $1, no $, 50 cents, no, $2. I sold the last one to you for this. Yeah, so we get in this argument all the time. H&M Auto Dismantling, Rancho Cordova, they have every Miata part that you conceivably think of. And I get to go in the backyard there. I'm one of the lucky few they allow to do that. And I just take whatever I want. You know, I just unpull it off. And so, and I hate it because I go down there and I expect to spend $200 or $300, you know, and all of a sudden they got a smoking deal on a hard top, or hey, we got some racing rims. You want these? You know, it's like, oh man, I didn't want to spend $1,500. So they love it when I come down there because I spend a lot of money. So, but I was down there the other day and I'm looking at all these Miatas, and I know that there's going to be a time that there are not going to be any. When I was a kid in high school, and this is when high school was brand new in the 70s, I was really big into MGs. I know, everybody has to start someplace. So I was really big into MGs, and I owned 2 or 3 MGs. And I used to go down to the American River Auto Dismantle. Those of you from Sacramento old times, you remember that, and C&C Auto Dismantle down there. And they would have rows and rows of MGs. And I would rob the parts that I wanted off these old MGs and for my own cars. And I know there's none anymore. There are no MGs in any wrecking yard anywhere. And so, or very few. Really hard to find. And someday, that's going to be our beloved Miata. There's going to be a time when there's just no more of them. And so, you know, those NAs, they're going away. Kids are wrecking them left and right, and the parts are disappearing, and they're, you know, snagging all the parts and ruining them. And I mean, not just the kid, but it's just everyone's using those cars. It's a very popular car. That's why we love them. But will I do a transmission overhaul video? I think I've mentioned this before on the what I will and will not do. So probably not. All right. Right now, it's $200 or $300 to buy a used transmission. Okay. The overhaul kit 15, 20 years ago when I first started, it would cost me about $500 to $600 for synchronizers, updated full synchronizer, blocker rings, gaskets, seals, bearings, everything that I would need to do a decent overhaul on a Miata transmission cost me between $500 and $600. I would put that transmission in a car. Of course, it shifted great. It's what I did for a living for Ford. But the transmission, if we were using second gear on turn 11 at Thunderhill or over the 5 at Thunderhill, the transmission would last a year. And then you'd wipe out third gear. I learned that if I did Thunderhill turn 11 and turn 5 in third gear and didn't use second gear, the transmissions lasted indefinitely. Okay. Sonoma is hard on transmissions because of, you know, the hairpin turn down at the bottom. So there's a couple turns on, anytime you got to use second gear, it's really hard on the Miata transmission. So whether I put a used transmission in it or I rebuilt one, they still lasted a year. Once I stopped using second gear on the racetrack when I didn't need to and I got faster and was able to pull those turns in third, no more transmission failures, okay? So it just wasn't worth it for me to spend the $600 and a whole day rebuilding that transmission when I could just put a used one in there. And those transmissions got down to, I remember buying them for $50 for an NB tranny, okay, which has an updated third gear synchronizer. I was paying $50 for those. So, I mean, I had a bunch of them. I still have like maybe 20. All right. So I still have a pretty big supply on it. There is going to be a time when I'm going to need to start overhauling them again. I kept every broken tranny I ever had. So if I needed to make more, I could make them. The problem with doing the transmission videos, I was a transmission mechanic. And that is something that you just can't teach somebody to do mainly over a video in a couple of hours. Okay. There are a lot of little parts and springs and keepers and, you know, and detent balls and a bunch of stuff in there that thing has to be perfect or it doesn't shift. And so, and even worse is an automatic. And I built automatics for Ford. So they're pretty tricky. It's not something super simple that, you know, like the rest of the Miata stuff is pretty simple to work on and I can show you in a video. That video would be 20 hours long at least. And I might lose a lot of you. Also, too, it requires a lot of special tools. Yeah, most of them I made myself, but only because I know what they're trying to achieve by this special tool that what they're trying to do to get this off. You know, some of the bearings have special press. There's a couple of really big bolts on there, and you got a shaft that's this long. And I made a socket. I cut the back of a socket, welded it to an arm, so I have the socket on there. So there's some specialty tools that it takes to build a stick shift transmission, just like it does an automatic transmission. So when push comes to shove in years in the future, and I really need to do one because I can't find any more trannies, then I'll see about doing that. Okay, but I got a lot of you asking for that transmission overhaul video. All right, enough of that. So John Boheme asks actually a couple questions. He goes, hey, I saw that you put a lot of RTV on that oil pan, and did it drip inside the pan? Yeah, they do drip inside the pan, but the RTV sticks to the metal pretty well, and I've never seen any of it stuck on the pickup screen. So if I saw a lot of RTVs on the pickup screen, I'd really be worried. Actually, there was a recall for Ford Mustangs back like that in the 90s where they changed the RTV formula and it came all apart on the inside and it clogged up the pickup screen and it burned up. It was the little four-cylinder, the 2.3, and it burned up the engine. So, I mean, it is possible, but on the RTV that I'm using, that I show you, that gray Permatex non-acid silicone, it just sticks to wherever it drips off. It doesn't come off. It doesn't dissolve in oil. And that was the problem with the Ford RTV back in the 90s or 80s or whatever that was. Okay, so yeah, good question though. Oil pan removal on the lift or on the ground versus doing it on the ground. You got to get the engine out. I did it in the car one time. I had a brace, I hung the engine, I dropped the subframe. It took me way longer than to just pull the whole thing out and then fix it and then put it back in. It was way longer. It took me like 6 or 7 hours to get that subframe off of there, disconnecting the steering and the brakes and everything and the suspension and dropping it down, hanging the motor to get to the pan. It just wasn't worth it. You know, I can pull those engines out 25, 30 minutes. So it just wasn't worth not doing it out of the car. All right. Thanks, John, for the questions, though. Getting down to the last few questions. It says, Michael say what? That's his name. And he asked a question about disconnecting the sway bars in the rain. He goes, will it hurt the alignment? So sometimes my experienced drivers like to disconnect the sway bars front and rear when it's raining, and it gives them a little bit more traction. Okay, it's a common cure, and so we do that. Does it affect the alignment? No. Okay, in the alignment, you should be doing the alignment with the sway bars disconnected to begin with, because we don't want the sway bars manipulating our angles at all. So usually when we do the alignment, we disconnect the sway bars. You just have to undo one end link in the front and in the back, and then we set the alignment. Then when we go to do the sway bar adjustment, if you remember from the video I did on sway bars, is that we get the car on its rest of all of its weight and we set it so it's neutral. So I set the tension so there's no tension on the sway bars at all. You can kind of tell because you can just slip the bolt in and out that holds the end link on. So if you have to pull on the sway bar or the end link to get the bolt in, you don't have it set to neutral. Okay, so will this hurt your alignment? No, you'll be fine, buddy. Run that thing without a sway bar, have a good time, and you'll like it. Don't forget to drive offline though. If it's really raining, don't drive the same line you drive during the daytime or during the dry time. Drive the opposite, because those rocks, they don't have as much wear on them, and there's no tire buildup on there, and they're a little rougher. So it's a lot faster to drive offline if it's puddling. It's a good tip for you because you subscribed. All right. This is another question from somebody named Art Form. Will I work on other people's Miatas? Art Form. Yeah, sure. He said he's from California, wants to know if I'll work on his Miata. Absolutely. You know, I can help you guys out with working on your Miata if you're close by. A lot of times I probably get at least contacted once a day from somewhere in the world about somebody having problems with their Miata, and I always take the time to try to help them fix it either over the phone or via email. But if you want to bring me your car in person, you're in Northern California, it's an easy contact for me. You know, I live above Sacramento, and yeah, I'd be happy to take a look at your car. I mean, that's what A+ Racing is all about helping you guys get your cars running, and let's get to the racetrack. Speaking of that racetrack, I'm wrapping up this video. I hope that it helped you out. I'll see you at the racetrack. Bye now.